Welcome to All Things Chiropractic.
Welcome to another episode of All Things Chiropractic. I'm Paul Andrews.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Mark Davini.
Don't put me into a box.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Right? So today we're going to dive into boxes 14 and 15 of the CMS 1500 claim form. And before you...
I've been waiting for this one since we started podcasting.
Listen, before you shut off, hit pause, roll your eyes. This isn't going to be just a technical, here's box 14, put in this date. This is about why is it so significant and what does it really mean? Where does it correspond into your daily practice, documentation? What are you really saying on this claim form when you're filling out box 14 and should be, but are not, filling out box 15?
And then if we're going to put this in simple, practical terms, you get paid.
Yeah. So if you know anything about the 1500 claim form in box 14 and or 15, that's where a date goes. And my little cutesy title is First Dates Are Awkward. Have you ever been set up on a date yourself, like a blind date or anything like that?
No.
Me neither. I would never want to. I don't know. It just seems so weird.
I know that would just seem so weird.
Yeah. I think it's just part of, there's apps and things I won't mention that younger kids use now, but to me, yeah, it was weird. Anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know why we're talking about that.
I don't know.
So let's just define what these two fields are on the claim form so we understand what we're talking about. And I'm sure all of your billing and financial CAs will know what box 14 is, because that is date of current illness, injury, pregnancy, or last menstrual period.
Maybe about a month ago.
Yeah. Well, hey, we won't go to that. But for purposes of our typical audience, we can strike out pregnancy and LMP because we just don't. It's not relevant to the services. It may be part of the clinical picture, but it's not relevant to the claim form.
We don't treat pregnancy.
Yeah.
Directly.
Yeah. So date of current illness or injury, those are the two choices in box 14 you typically have to make. And the question is, what choices are you making or should you be making? Now, I'll tell you right up front that oftentimes when I'm looking inside software or we're onboarding a new billing client, they don't even fill this out. Like, it's empty in the software. So then the question is, well, what happens when you try to submit an electronic claim or a paper claim and there's no date in box 14? Well, one of two things could happen. I'm glad you asked me that question.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
So, depending on the software you use or the clearinghouse you use electronically, they will put in the date of service that you're billing out in box 14. Or they'll flag it as an error and say you need to put a date in box 14. I prefer the latter because then you can correct it correctly versus not realizing that the doctor, yes, the provider is responsible. This is a clinical function. This is a clinical element, data element. The doctor should be putting in the date in box 14.
Yeah. Well, imagine the doctor now. They do this claim. They don't fill out that box. They send it out and they do the first option there where the carrier just plugs the date in, and now the doctor gets paid. Is there anything given to the doctor indicating that they did not fill out that claim correctly? They think they're doing it right.
No.
I sent it out. I got paid. Why do I have to pay attention to this?
And they're not hitting the button, right? So the CA won't even, if they don't know that's empty,
right,
and the clearinghouse fills that in, or their software with the data service, they'll never know.
Exactly.
But what are you telling the carrier? That
wrong date.
Every time you submit a claim, you're saying that there's a new injury on that data service. So if they're coming in 3 times a week for 4 weeks, they've had 12 new injuries
And remember, as a compliance company, we always deal with risk management. So you might hear this and say, well, I'm getting paid. What's the big deal? They can put in any date they want as long as they pay me. The problem comes from when somebody has to scrutinize that claim. You're being challenged, maybe as a review, as an audit, as some type of legal proceeding. You get challenged, and now you have to try and explain that incorrect date on the claim.
And you are so bold as to say, my documentation is perfect. It's awesome.
I remember everything.
But don't you realize that your claim is part of your documentation?
Exactly. And you are every bit as responsible for what's on the front of that claim as what's on the back of the claim, which Paul went into detail with in another podcast. Your legal responsibility and the legal ramifications of what's on the back of that claim form.
Because in Box 31 docs, providers, you're digitally signing these claim forms and you are attesting or certifying to the information that's on them, and all of the legal disclaimers and notifications that are on the back apply to the front.
Well, let's again dispel the myth. You are responsible. You can't blame your billing company and you can't blame your billing personnel. You, as the chiropractor of record in that office, are responsible for everything that goes out from that office.
So the question becomes, okay, you've got my attention now. What date should I be putting in Box 14? So it's a clinical data element. So it is a clinical function. If you don't know, the patient comes in and they don't know an exact date of onset, then you can use the date they first came in for that particular diagnosis that you're assigning. So that's the date. Now, I will say, if you're checking off one of the boxes in field 10 of the claim form, field 10 is whether it's auto, workers' comp, or a slip and fall. If you're checking off yes to any one of those three, then Box 14 should be the date of that accident when it occurred.
And if it was, say, an insidious onset, and because of that, you end up putting in the date that they came into the office, make sure the note supports that. So you should be able to go to that first day's note, and it should say onset, insidious. Now you know why that date was the date that they came into the office. So it does carry through even into your note documentation.
Now, I will make a side note here that there are some EHRs that allow you to check off the word gradual. Please do not do that. I don't know why they allow that. Because as a function of the claim form, Box 14 is a date. If a word like the word gradual appears in there, that is not going to hit the carrier. What's going to hit the carrier is the software or the clearinghouse is going to auto replace that with, guess what? The date of service.
The date of service. So here we go back to an inaccurate documentation problem.
Yeah. So if your software has the word gradual near where Box 14 date would go in, please ignore it. Now, most EHRs, when the doctor's doing their documentation within their provider login, there will be an opportunity to put this date of current illness in. Now, that you tell me, doc, you're a clinician, can the date of injury or illness change even within a current plan of care?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you're going to be updating diagnosis because something changed, don't forget Box 14 also needs to change. And that's going to help you because now, from a carrier perspective, I'm looking at this going, something's changed, something's new. This is going to sort of reset this plan of care in a sense.
Yeah. Isn't this more, we'll say more important in situations like Medicare, where generally we know the Medicare system is a catch and release system. You treat them, you release them, you treat them, you release them. Whether they stay on as maintenance or not is a whole other discussion. But it's a catch and release system, which means that every time they come in and you start a new active treatment phase in Medicare, there might be a different date in Box 14, right? Make sure it's accurate is what we're saying.
Now, before you get too excited that, I'm going to get more visits from the carrier. If there's a hard cap of chiropractic visits, it doesn't mean that you'll reset that 12 or 20 per calendar year or anniversary date. Not saying that. Don't run out and think that's going to happen. But again, the need for ongoing care is now being reflected in the first thing the carrier sees, which is your claim form.
As a profession, we do have to shift away from thinking that all of this documentation and all of this minutia is simply an insurance issue. It is, so that you can get paid. But when you put stuff down in a document, I should say, and you put something in a document, it also becomes a risk management issue. At some point, you may be required to justify all of the information on all of the forms in any one patient record. So get away from thinking you're just doing this because. You might do it to get paid, of course, but that becomes part of a clinical document that may at some point in the future be scrutinized. So being accurate is important.
So let's talk about field 15, because it is a field that is not used nearly as much as it should be used.
So if you build it, it will come?
There's some carriers that will actually reject the claim because 15 is missing. Even when technically it shouldn't even need to be filled in, believe it or not. But
wow.
But okay.
Yeah.
So
surprise.
Yeah. What is box 14 and how would it correlate to box 14? So box 15 is just simply defined as other date. Pretty generic, doesn't mean much if you're just looking at it without knowing. But box 15 is basically...
Well, it sounds like we're on The Bachelor here.
I don't watch that show, but very telling that you do. I'll leave it there.
Other date.
He's trying to read everyone. Yeah. I'll leave it there.
My wife is smiling right now, laughing at me, even though she doesn't even listen to this one yet. I am going to get this one for the next.
Uh-huh.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's highlight that.
Yeah, I walked right into that one.
Yeah. Right. I'll put this clip on social media. That little isolation. I love it. Okay. So box 15, what is that? When should you, technical terms, fill this out? So if somebody comes in, let's say, for a low back condition, and this was January 2nd, and then they get better, shocker, and they decide, I don't need you anymore, or you decide we're catch and release, discharge, and then they come back in March 1st, and they have low back pain again. Same diagnosis, same basic condition. How do you handle that? So we already said, well, if it's a new onset exacerbation or injury, you put the new date in box 14. But what you would do is carry the old date from box 14 and put it in box 15 to tell the carrier,
interesting, really,
I have treated this condition before for this patient. It started on box 15's date. That was the date they first came in for this originally. But box 14 shows the recent exacerbation or re-injury causing the same condition.
That sounds like a pain in the butt.
It is. No lie, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's kind of a pain, especially because you can't reach box 15 easily in documentation, mostly for the provider. So you have to go in through front desk or where the assistants usually are. But that's okay, because once you do it once, you don't need to update box 15 again. If they're coming back in, if they exacerbate themselves again after being discharged or self-terminated, box 15 still stays the same because that's the original date of consultation for that condition.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to our position that first visit, that first note, even that first billing now, all of it will require that focus, that attention, but it makes a huge difference down the road.
And if you're telling this, as we said in our podcast on claim forms, in general, if you're telling the story in your documentation, that may never hit a carrier, but the claim form does.
Right.
So that's the story ahead of the story. It's the summary of the story.
Some people say, I have great documentation. Well, you know that commonly not, you don't submit notes with your document, with your billing, but the bill goes in every time.
Yeah.
So it has to tell the story and it has to make sense.
It's got to match.
That's right.
And so how does the carrier know what is the date you're actually reporting? Like how do they know it's either the date of injury or the date of first consultation or the latest, chronic condition manifestation? Well, those are qualifiers. So you will see if you're looking at your box 14 and 15 on your CMS 1500, I'm sure everyone is right now. Don't do it if you're driving. So you'll see a qual box, meaning qualifier, and that's just for a 3-digit qualifier to go in there. So 454 is the qualifier for initial treatment. 439 is a qualifier for accident. Your financial CAs will get to know this stuff for sure. And your software will automatically embed some of these qualifiers if you're not careful to describe them correctly. But again, it just goes to, we're getting into the weeds a little bit on the technicalities, but that's the whole point. Like, here we are, how many minutes into this podcast, and we're just talking about 2 boxes of claim form.
Just the 2.
Yeah, just the 2.
We haven't even got into the interesting part.
Yeah. Is there one? But so if you're saying to yourself, well, where do you get this information? How do you know this stuff? Well, that QR code on the top left-hand corner of the claim form is where you can get to nucc.org. The instructions for all these fields live there. Every carrier has their own additional instructions or, let's say, clarifications or refinements, but the federal government gives you their CMS 1500 guide, and that guide was updated July of 2024. It's version 12. You can see all that when you get on that website. I'm sure you're all going to run there. You can't wait. You're going to bookmark it and look at it all the time. But one of my points is, as we talk about this, these claim form fields have to match and correlate with the documentation itself. There's also an interdependency within the claim form of these fields. Because if I'm checking off box 10 and I'm saying this was an auto accident, that box 10 now correlates to box 14, which is what was the date of the accident. They have to correlate. Because if they don't, the claims adjuster is going to say, this isn't from this accident. I'm not paying this. So, got to be accurate there. If you are putting in box 15 as the original consult date, and box 14 is the recent exacerbation, and this is within 3 years, you're not coding out a new patient exam in box 24D. It has to be a re-exam or an established exam because it's within 3 years.
Which means the qualifiers might change.
Right. So, and then the diagnoses may be updated in box 21, which means box 24E, the pointers have to be updated. You can see how everything changes potentially when you start making these corrections and updates to your claim form.
And let's make a caution here. We know that, a lot of you don't do your billing directly yourself. And you should definitely have a working knowledge of billing in your office. But let's assume you have some staff member who does the billing for you. This person obviously has to know a lot. And they have to know what they're doing, and they have to understand it. So this is not a simple position. This person should be trained and should have ongoing training and make sure that they are, quote, compliant with the billing. This is obviously, we just spent the last, 20 minutes or so talking about 2 boxes. So you now as a practitioner understand the importance of these 2 boxes and maybe even might remember the actual reasons for them. But look at what Paul just said. How they interact with box 10 and box 21 and the qualifiers. And then we got box 14 and box 15. And, all of a sudden you realize there's a lot to this. And it's reasons to say no. So do it well, and be done with it. Don't give them a reason to say no.
And don't go fishing. It's really not advisable to say, well, I don't know it, so I'm just going to keep trying till something works, whether it's a code, a qualifier, a date. because those duplicate submissions get logged, and these carriers start saying either this person really doesn't know what they're doing, or I suspect they're trying to do something more malicious, and you're going to put yourself on the radar because it's...
And in many cases, on the defensive.
Right. And remember, I said they all correlate, right? And I used the exam as the example. One of the things I get a lot, and I don't understand it, is, well, this was an auto accident, so it's a new condition. I'm going to use a new patient exam, even though you've seen the person within 3 years. It doesn't make any sense to me in today's world. I don't get it. Like, I understand it's a new condition. It's a brand new accident. But again, if you understand these claim forms and you understand the requirements, you'll get to those conclusions more than one way.
Yeah, and there's sometimes idiosyncrasies that we can look at and go, that makes no sense to me. A new patient to me is a new patient, and once you're a new patient, you're an established patient. But no, if it goes longer than 3 years, you're converted back to a new patient. But that's the rule. That's the way it is, and we all have to live by some of these little idiosyncrasies. We can't just interpret it our own way and make it fit our thinking.
And one of the worst things I've heard about this, well, I didn't want the auto carrier to know they were a patient before they got into the accident. Yes, I've heard this. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Or the lawyer told me not to do that because we don't want them to know about the other accident. Hello.
Right. Whether they were cash paying or on their fifth auto, it doesn't matter. You got to code it correctly
and Big Brother's watching.
Right. Because what do we say? Doctor, if you start treating the claim and not the patient, you get into trouble.
Yeah. And if you start doing what the attorney tells you to do when it comes to your claim, remember, their license is not on the line. Yours is.
Exactly. It's easier to play with somebody else's license and livelihood.
Yeah. Right? Oh, don't worry about it. Just do it. Just do it.
Yeah.
And then you're the one called in before the board and you say, well, why did you do it? What's your defense? The lawyer told me to.
They're not going to fess up to that. I can tell you that much.
No. Oh, I never told him to do anything he shouldn't have done. I just suggested that if it's possible for him to do it.
Yeah. So some closing thoughts as we conclude on this riveting box 14 and 15 scenarios. The big picture. Your claim form in every field that gets reported is telling the story of that patient when the SOAP note's not there. It goes ahead of it all the time, unless you're attaching the notes behind it for like an auto work comp. But most of the time, it's the claim form only. So is the story true? Is it accurate? And does it correlate back to the SOAP note documentation that you have?
So to follow everything Paul just said, make it your field of dreams, not your fields of nightmare.
I can't. Well, thanks again for joining us for All Things
He's
Chiropractic.
not thanking me. He's thanking you.
Thanks for hanging in there. I'm Paul Andrews.
Dr. Mark Davini. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to All Things Chiropractic. We'd love to hear from you. Visit allthingschiropractic.com with comments, episode ideas, or questions. Or connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at All Things Chiropractic Podcast. Be sure to join Dr. Mark Davini and Paul Andrews next time for another episode of All Things Chiropractic.